Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is brought to you by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures, the industry's #1 specialty travel company for the very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now, your Waypoints host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
For 50 years, the nonprofit environmental advocacy group American Rivers has been a leader in protecting and restoring rivers throughout the United States. Founded in 1973, the group exists to protect wild rivers, restore damaged rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. That means that if you're an angler and someone who values the resources our sport depends on, American Rivers is a group you need to know about. At a time when the rivers of our nation are more threatened than ever by climate change, unnecessary dams, pollution, floods, and outdated government policies, one of the single greatest threats to our rivers is simply a lack of awareness of their importance in our daily lives. And for anglers, the importance of rivers to pretty much every aspect of our sport is absolute. Tom Kieran became president and CEO of American Rivers in 2021. Today, he oversees a staff of approximately 80 people, leading what has become the nation's most trusted and influential river conservation organization. Before joining American Rivers, Tom built an impressive resume in the nonprofit and conservation world, leading the American Wind Energy Association for over 7 years, serving as past president of the National Parks Conservation Association, co-founding the Rocky Mountain Outdoor Center in Colorado, and working as a guide in North Carolina. He received his BA from Dartmouth, which we all know is pretty much the #1 college on the planet, as well as an MBA from Stanford, which isn't a bad school in its own right. His work in conservation has established Tom as one of the most formidable players and foremost experts on the national conservation stage, and we're thrilled to welcome Tom to the program to talk rivers. Tom Kieran, welcome to Waypoints. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks, Jim. I've been a longtime fan of Yellow Dog, so good to be here in this role today. So
well,
good stuff.
You're back in Bozeman. You're passing through as you do your tour. It seems like you're always on the road for American Rivers. And
either on the road or in the river, one or the other, but yes.
That's great. Well, before we start, Tom, talking policy and mission and kind of the American Rivers story, I want you to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself. I know you're a fisherman and a river enthusiast, but tell us how you found your way to the sport of fly fishing and where your love for rivers kind of first started.
Yeah, happy to do that. And frankly, I love talking with different folks about their connections to rivers because it's all kinds of different wonderful ways people are connected. So for me, I grew up outside Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia, and there is a creek across the street from my house. And unfortunately, we lost my father in Vietnam. He was killed over there, and it was the creek across the street where my brother and I spent a lot of time just recovering or, dealing with that. And then as two young boys, playing in that creek, got to know the creek. The creek connected down to the Potomac River, and we would wander down to the Potomac, and before you knew it, I'd be out on the Potomac, kayaking, fishing, and so it just started with that itty-bitty little creek.
As it often does.
Exactly.
And then as you grew older, high school, off to college, rivers stayed a part of your life.
I had the good fortune. I went to a high school that had a kayaking program, rather unique, but ended up learning to kayak on the Potomac River there, and then went off to college, Dartmouth College, and boated there, and then was a river guide, a whitewater guide down in the southeast and out west. And it was when I was out west that some of my friends were anglers, and they said, well, Tom, let's go fishing. And so I was like, ooh, that would be great. I would love that. But since I didn't have my father to teach me, my friends took me out and got me hooked, so to speak. So one thing led to another. But since early on in life, moving water, being on rivers, being near rivers has been core to my psyche, my personality, and rivers just flow through me. And so it's been a great life and career. On the work side, yes, but family, married, we've got 3 kids, and we've taken them on any number of fishing trips, boating trips. So it's part of who we are.
Well, over the years, you've had the chance, certainly in your role with American Rivers, all the way back to your guide days, to visit a lot of different parts of the country and spend time on a lot of different rivers. You talked a little bit about the Potomac and kind of where you grew up, but aside from that, do you have any favorites when it comes to fishing? And that's a hard one to answer, I know.
Exactly. So have traveled the world, bunch of time boating up in Alaska, over in Africa, doing some first descents. But for fishing, it would be honestly where it started for me in Colorado. My buddies, as I mentioned, took me fishing for trout. And I just remember this. I will share one story, whereas one day it was early on as I was learning, but on a lake, high lake, Alpine Lake in Colorado, and given the angle I was looking, there was a trout I could see out 20 yards or so, 30 yards out, and I could just see him, and it was like, put a dry fly out maybe 5 feet in front of him, and it was a shockingly, for me, reasonable cast. Got it right out there and saw him go, oh, wait, and he just went up and took it. It was like, oh, you have those moments that do not leave your memory, and it was like, bam, I don't know. So, for me, a lot of my passion and love for fishing is out west, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming. I do a little bit back on the Potomac and the East Coast, warm water stuff. But out here is kind of where I come for vacation and really enjoy it.
That's the Holy Land. We get it.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
We get it. Well, life depends on rivers. Mm-hmm. That is the tagline for American River, the organization's tagline. Let's talk about American Rivers and what is it that the group actually does.
Yep.
Now, for some of our listeners, they may have heard the name, they may be familiar with American Rivers as an organization, but they don't really know the mission and what the last 50 years have been about. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, you alluded to it. We're just over 50 years old. To give a few stats so people have scale, we've got a little over 100 staff. We've got 9 regional offices throughout the country. And our role is to help restore damaged rivers, protect healthy rivers, and build this river and water movement in the country. We partner with all of the local watershed groups. We partner with very focused, really good groups like Trout Unlimited, love TU, and Chris Wood, who's their CEO. American River's role is broader. We have a bunch of anglers as supporters. I'm an angler, and we work with some of the frontline communities that may be impacted by poor water quality. We work with tribes. We work with communities that are stressed not having clean drinking water. And so we absolutely care deeply about fish and angling, and we believe, well, we all depend. You mentioned life depends on rivers. Fish depend on healthy rivers. We humans depend on our drinking water from healthy rivers and watersheds. And so American River's role is to lead or help lead this river movement in the country that is inclusive of, yes, Trout Unlimited and Atlantic Salmon Federation and other communities and people and organizations that care about rivers for other reasons. And our goal is to bring that full breadth of people and organizations into this river movement, because that's what moves politics. That's what moves policy. If you can get a broad coalition advocating for the river that includes some Republicans, some Democrats, some anglers, some recreationalists, some folks that care about the communities, and bring us all together, that's when the votes in Congress or a state legislature move in the right direction. So American Rivers is about bringing all of the people that care about our rivers and clean water.
Well, and when you combined all those different factions, all those different interests, you end up with a significantly louder voice. Ooh. And as we know, that's what moves the needle these days.
Exactly. And I've been, for better or worse, but walking the halls of Congress for the last 30 or so years, leading different conservation groups. And when you walk into a member of Congress's office, or when you're testifying before a committee, and you're speaking on behalf of a number of different groups and perspectives, or you have all those groups with you at the table, that's when members of Congress sit up and go, whoa, all right, wait, this isn't just a really special interest. This is a broad interest. All these different groups care. Wow, I need to do something if that's what they're asking. So that's, in my opinion, where the power, the political power of American Rivers comes in, because we work with that full spectrum, whether Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whether, again, anglers, recreationalists, folks that are working on the economic engines of so many communities, often that are, most of our cities are on rivers. And the waterfronts of those cities are getting, or they want to get them redeveloped and clean water and have recreation there in a downtown urban area. And bringing all of those groups together, that's when we can move policy in the right direction to help protect our rivers.
Yeah, that's quite the group of stakeholders when you start throwing in, like you said, city, development, waterfront development, those economic drivers. It gets pretty broad in a hurry.
Yeah.
And a group to be able to bring all of those diverse stakeholders together, I think a lot of people don't realize that American Rivers touches so many different facets there.
Another quick story, this was maybe a year or so ago, testifying before a committee with the head of the National Hydropower Association. So this is the association whose members own a lot of the dams, that many of which we have concerns with, those dams, but we were there together advocating on behalf of a piece of legislation. And the chair of that committee said, the two of you have never, ever been before my committee supporting the same bill. And we go, yes, sir, that's correct. But we are here now. And, it was powerful. And when we can come together like that, you can move things. And in fact, that was Malcolm Wolf, the head of the Hydro Association, and I and some others, but got the $2.4 billion in the infrastructure bill because we were working together, both sides of the aisle, and that $2.4 billion is what is a lot of the funding that's coming out to a lot of groups now to remove a lot of dams, to fix a bunch of culverts, et cetera, because we reached across and broadened our coalition.
That's pretty amazing. And that's some big picture stuff, no doubt about it. If I'm an angler, though, and I'm listening to this program right now, and they're like, oh, okay, that's impressive. That's great. I mean, waterfronts and, different major cities, hydro, things like that. If I'm an angler, how does this impact my world?
Yeah.
Give us a couple examples from kind of a recreational fishing perspective. You don't even have to go as granular as, specific fly fishing, but recreational fishing, how American Rivers has had an impact and kind of moved the needle as an organization.
Good example, and folks may be well familiar with it, but the Klamath River. We are working in partnership with many groups, but to remove the 4 dams on the Klamath, and we've gotten 3 of them down. We're getting the 4th one as we speak down. That'll open up several hundred miles of new rivers that have not had salmon coming up. It's going to improve. As we often say, the fastest way to restore a river is remove a dam, because you're reconnecting the river, you're returning the river to its more normal water temperature and water quality. So the Klamath is a place where we're removing a dam that's going to restore that fishery. We're doing that throughout the country. There are dams we took down in partnership with other groups, but 80 dams this year, whether it's the Shoals River Dam down in North Carolina. We're working on some dams up in Maine. We've got 10 dams we're taking down in Pennsylvania right now. We just took down the largest dam of Pennsylvania on the Susquehanna. And all of these will improve the fisheries, most of them cold water fisheries. So trout anglers, there's a lot of improved habitat out there. And I will say, there are times when, with all the challenges our rivers are facing, all the challenges ecologically that we have with climate change, we'll probably talk about this, but one of the best things we can do is restore the functioning of our rivers so that they can be more resilient to increasing floods and droughts and increasing water temperatures. Get the dams down.
Well, and it is amazing when we get out of the way and let nature do its thing, just how perfect it can be. It's really amazing how that balance is found. And I do want to stay with the topic of dams for just a minute, because this is a big part of what American Rivers is focusing on.
Yes.
But there are so many stories. I know with the Elwha Dam, when that one came down, within a season, they were actually seeing this balance fall right back into place, and these anadromous fish starting to migrate back up that they hadn't been able to do in decades. And it figures itself out much quicker than we can even imagine.
Rivers, as we all know, are dynamic systems. They will bounce back. And I'll also say a beautiful thing, just as an individual, seeing that river bounce back and restore itself, once we give it the ability to restore itself, it is so hopeful. It is so positive. There are a lot of things in life right now that are stressful, challenging, and concerning. But when you're doing good work, when you're doing permanent good for a river, removing that dam and seeing that river come back to life, the anadromous fish coming back up. On the Elwha, actually, the tribes now have a fishing season. They are taking salmon, restoring their both nutritionally, but also their cultural traditions there. It's wonderful to see that, and it can't not put a smile on your face. You're going, I'm doing permanent good on this river by removing that dam. So it's a hopeful, positive thing that we're doing. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, I know from my involvement with American Rivers, there are something like 90,000 dams in the country today that are no longer serving the purpose they were built to provide, right? Decades ago, maybe over 100 years ago, basically they're kind of outdated and useless, yet they're still there as these impediments on these free-flowing rivers, or not so free-flowing in this case. A lot of these dams were once upon a time kind of at the epicenter of a community's livelihood, but now they're old, they're unsafe. Yep. Oftentimes. They're no longer serving their intended purposes. To date, American Rivers has been involved in removing a couple hundred of these dams. But, and this is what I think is so fascinating, in your strategic goals that the organization has laid out, you guys have a stated goal of removing 30,000 harmful dams by the year 2050. Correct. I mean, that's a big, audacious number. Is it possible?
Absolutely it's possible. And I'll share some of the calculations that led to it. But let me preface it by saying there has been a theory, a philosophy that we need to protect about a third of all nature. If life on Earth is going to continue in a healthy way, you've got to have roughly a third of all our rivers, miles, et cetera, protected. And so we did the calculation, and what dams, where, how many do we need to remove? And yes, we're targeting 30,000 removals by 2050. We will need to build the dam removal industry, if you will, the construction firms, the project managers, the federal funding, state and local funding. We need to speed up the permitting process for removing dams. But we believe we absolutely can do that, and we need to do that. We are already seeing an acceleration in the number of dams that are starting to come down by building this industry is not the best word, but it's building the industry of folks that know how to take down dams. And I do want to also say, it's not as though we're opposed to all dams. We're not opposed to hydropower. Hydropower does play an important part of the grid. What we're opposed to, as you mentioned, are outdated, useless, unsafe dams that are having extreme impact, negative impact on our rivers. They are causing extinctions of key species in our rivers, those dams. Those are the dams we've got to get out ASAP. So we are prioritizing our list, but we absolutely are able, and we're seeing it now, as I mentioned, the $2.4 billion from Congress, an acceleration of dams coming out in this country. And it's for improving for angling, for health of our rivers, also for drinking water. We get 70% of our drinking water from our rivers. And I think you would like clean drinking water. So
most of us would.
Yeah. So it's a thing that helps, the fish in the rivers, but also helps us in our communities.
I've never really thought about what you just mentioned, because that's a big number when you talk about removing that many dams. But there is an industry that develops from that removal process. And you think of the correlation of like back in the day, the Roosevelt years, the TVA, and there was this whole economic stimulus around building dams in the first place. Yep. Like they went up like crazy. Army Corps of Engineers, all these states, the federal government involved in constructing dams everywhere. Well, now there's this opportunity to generate, all these jobs and really build up this industry for the removal of these outdated and useless dams.
Exactly. And it's important to note, I mentioned the ecological negative impact of dams. Dams also are a problem in the context of climate change. First, and impact on fish health, in that behind a dam, obviously, often a sizable reservoir that reservoir is getting warm, if not hot. And especially if it's a dam with water flowing over the top, it is hammering. It's increasing the water temperatures downstream, often impacting cold water fish in a devastating way. Also, those reservoirs, depending upon where they are, release a lot of methane. Methane is a very potent climate change gas, global warming gas. And so removing the dams and removing, hence the methane emissions, removing that warm water, and reducing the amount of water evaporation. You lose a lot of water in the reservoir to evaporation. So people say, oh, we need dams because we don't have a lot of water in the Southwest, just say. Well, actually, dams and reservoirs are not a great place to store water. If you want to store water, store it down in the aquifer, in the groundwater, which is something in California and other states they're starting to do. So reservoirs and dams are not normally a great strategy when you're dealing with floods and droughts. And you alluded to it, but we're going to have more intense flooding throughout the country. We're seeing it already, and that's going to lead to dam failures. And one of the best ways of avoiding that is have healthy rivers with floodplains adjacent and wetlands connected so the water can slow down, spread out, and sink in. So dams are not what we want in the time of climate change and more floods and droughts.
Well, that makes sense. And I think you touched on a lot of things that people probably hadn't thought about with some of these dams. As you said, it's like, well, we need to, conserve water. We need to hold more water. Well, that may not be the answer in most of these cases. Pretty fascinating. Well, let me ask you this. If I'm an angler in the U.S. right now, and we just touched on dams, what else should I be worried about when it comes to conservation in the environment and basically river issues for kind of our present time and looking ahead down the road? What are some of the big issues of concern? What are the biggest challenges and threats that are facing our rivers and in turn our sport, the things we care about as anglers in the immediate future and in the years ahead?
Let me start with a hopeful thought.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I wanted to get the bad out of it, but let's mix them together. That's perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's the hopeful thought. And back, we'll remember back in the 70s, even the 60s, our rivers caught on fire. I mean, we had a time when, before the Clean Water Act, we were dumping all kinds of stuff in our rivers. They would catch on fire. It was horrendous. As a country, we said that is not acceptable. We had the Clean Water Act and subsequent pieces of legislation federally and state, and we cleaned up our rivers to a large extent. We are now facing new sets of challenges: climate change, biodiversity loss. We're losing species at twice the rate in our rivers than land-based species. And we have recent Supreme Court decisions. For example, a decision called Sackett versus, I think it's EPA, where the Supreme Court changed the definition of waters of the U.S. such that now about 2/3 of all of our wetlands are unprotected. So the reason I kind of did that lead up with the Clean Water Act, as a country, we have at times addressed the challenges of our rivers to our benefit and the benefit of angling and the health of our rivers. We have a new set of challenges. We as a country need to step up again. We need to address how do we better protect our rivers now with the climate change challenge, with biodiversity loss. And the answer is we need to do more dam removal. We need to do more floodplain reconnection to our rivers. We need to protect more of them so they don't get damaged, i.e. using wild and scenic or other means of protecting our rivers. We've got those sets of strategies to meet the challenges now. So what anglers should be doing is realizing, I love this river. I love fishing. I love these fish. And I need to get involved. Now is, and Jim, you've used the term a complete angler. People that love rivers can't just sit on the sidelines, if you will, and enjoy your river, because it's not going to be healthy in the years to come unless you get involved. And there are many, many ways, and we can talk about this for people to get involved, but you need to get involved if you care about your rivers.
Absolutely. I don't think the days of, grabbing your gear out of the closet, hitting the local stream, and then when you're done with your session, you put it away and you don't think about it and maybe till your next time out. It's not enough these days. There's too many threats and challenges. And I know a lot of people say, well, man, I fish to escape all of that. I don't want to think about the doom and gloom aspects. I just want to go fishing. Well, we all do, but we also want a place to be able to go fishing. And in this day and age, as you said, it's not enough just to participate. You really kind of have to be engaged. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can, be militant and dedicate all of your time to being an activist on this, or you can just get involved in the right groups. You can sound off when collective voices are needed to legislators and politicians. You can support the right projects and organizations that are trying to move the needle for these rivers. But unfortunately, we live in a time where you do have to kind of get involved and let your voice be heard.
And as you alluded, there are different ways of getting involved. You can, obviously, I need to say, you can join American Rivers as a member. That's wonderful. You can, we've got email lists, so you can sign up for emails and all that and send your member of Congress or your state governor or whatever an email. That's great. I will also say, getting involved where you're maybe writing handwritten letters or even going to your state capitol for a meeting or going to Congress in Washington, D.C. for a meeting, I find that actually really enjoyable because people will listen to you. You're a constituent who cares. And virtually every politician, if you're a constituent, they want to listen to you. And they do respect, hey, you could be off having a party and doing whatever, but no, you're here because you care about something. So it's actually, I think, really fulfilling. You get a sense of, wow, I'm part of the democratic process. I'm voicing something and I'm being heard. I may not win all the time, but I'm part of the process. So I actually find it positive, and I kind of feel like my shoulder's to the wheel. I'm doing what I can, and it adds to my joy of fishing. It's kind of just an additional part of the whole experience. I'm out there fishing, and now I'm going to Congress to talk about the fishing and the river, and it's just part of the totality of what it means to care about a river and be an angler.
I like that. That's a good perspective on things for sure. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. We'll focus on the doom and gloom for a second, but then the positive. But okay. Let me ask you this. We talked about dams. We talked about these 90,000 unnecessary, kind of old, useless dams. We've talked about climate change and the water temps, pollution, floods, of course, outdated government policies, all of these things that are negatively impacting our rivers. What is the one thing, Tom, that keeps you up at night, that you're most concerned about right now as far as rivers go in the next 10, 20 years?
When you look at the full number of people and organizations that care about rivers, there are about 8,000 to 9,000 Friends of the Yampa or the Gallatin River Task Force, or all these individual groups. We are not yet, and we're too far from having a coalesced movement. And now is the time we've got to be speaking up on rivers. There are some fundamental decisions being made, whether it's by the Supreme Court or by Congress, dealing with climate change and some of these other issues. We must bring together the breadth of those that love our rivers. If we are able to do that in the next 5 years, we have the potential to truly move Congress and strengthen the Clean Water Act and protect our rivers, restore many of our rivers. But we have this window of opportunity, and the only way we're going to do it is if people get involved. So what keeps me up at night is there is a cynicism, or there in the country, there's a sense of government doesn't listen, or we're all going to hell in a handbasket, I might as well give up, or doom and gloom, you mentioned it. And I worry about that. In fact, the opposite needs to happen, where people need to go, wow, I got a window of opportunity. I need to help out here. I need to get involved. So, and I need to get involved not just with my other angling buddies, but with, let's actually work with some of the tribes, or let's work with that Hispanic community downstream, or the recreational groups, or whatever, and be willing to be curious and understand some of these other groups and come together. And that is what American Rivers is very focused on right now, leading the river and water movement to come together. We will have extraordinary power, political power, ability to move Congress, if we do that in the next couple of years. So we're looking to bring this very broad tent together of all of the 8,000 to 9,000 groups, all the anglers and everybody together to create this political momentum. And I truly think it's what will help protect life on Earth if we do that.
Well, you think about everybody that cares about clean water and rivers. That's a big number if everyone can come together. No doubt about it.
Yes.
That is a big number.
And I will say, in bringing together the spectrum of political ideologies, you can be a strong conservative, diehard Republican. You can be a very liberal progressive Democrat. And let's get together and find a shared agenda on rivers and how to protect her. And that'll move policy. That will be exciting.
Well, let's look kind of to the other page here. We talked about the things that keep you up at night you're concerned about.
Yep.
What are some of the things you're really excited about right now as far as some of the recent wins or some really positive momentum that's going on? Maybe it's with particular projects. I know you mentioned a few minutes ago the Klamath Dams project. Yep. What other things do you really get fired up talking about because you're like, this has made a difference and we are winning in this region or this area or on this particular river? Where's some excitement right now?
A couple other examples that come to mind. I mean, Bristol Bay up in Alaska, what a huge win for angling, for conservation, of winning that battle. And it took a lot of people you do a little kind of what happened here. It took different voices at different moments coming in and winning that.
Over like a 15-year period.
Exactly. And, and there again, it was Republicans, Democrats, people that cared about that place came together in different ways in different times. So that could be a role model.
And I think, most of our listeners are aware of the Pebble Mine campaign up in Bristol Bay, but headwaters of Bristol Bay, arguably the most important area and resources for wild Pacific salmon stocks, largest in the world. And it was under threat of a massive, massive mining project that could have had cataclysmic, impacts on that entire fishery and all those fish stocks. And it has largely been stopped at this point.
I think 99.8% stopped. So, I mean, that project is pretty dead.
It's a big win.
It's a huge win. Now, I am excited by, thinking of that history and the history of the Klamath, where we're about to get the fourth dam down. The Snake River, the lower Snake River has 4 dams. And we and many of our partners are working that. The coalition is led by a number of tribes, especially the Nez Perce. And the chairman of the Nez Perce, Shannon Wheeler, who's an outstanding leader. We're gaining momentum there to remove those 4 dams, and to be clear, and to replace the services those dams provide to those communities. So they currently do get about 1 gigawatt of hydropower energy. All right, we need to figure out, and we are figuring out how to replace that with wind and solar. How do we replace the barge ability? I mean, currently they're able to barge up and down the river with rail. So we're figuring out how to replace all these services. Removing those 4 dams will restore the runs of salmon up to one of the biggest, if not the biggest and best, cold water refugia in the lower 48, the Snake and the salmon headwaters. And that I'm really excited about, because the winds that are back, if you will, it's still going to take another 5, 6, 8 years to get an act of Congress to authorize the decommissioning of those dams. So there's a ways to go, but we're making real progress. And that'll be the world's largest ecological restoration project ever. So, we've got some huge projects ahead of us. We also have a lot of small and medium-sized ones, but the point being, we're seeing some momentum. We're seeing people get excited by, yes, dams used to be viewed as all the time progress in infrastructure, and people are realizing, no, natural infrastructure. I mean, a healthy river is really good, yes, for the fish and for us and our economy and our drinking water and all that we rely on. So I think people are realizing the importance of ecological health in our watersheds, and some of these big projects are starting to come. So I truly feel we're gaining a lot of momentum just when we need it. So that gets me out of bed in the morning.
Some things keep you up at night, but then that gets you out of bed. I like that. That's important. One thing that American Rivers has been heavily involved in throughout a lot of states is the Wild and Scenic Act. Talk to us a little bit about that and why that matters.
So the Wild and Scenic Bill was passed 1968, and actually it was one of the reasons American Rivers was founded is people were going, wow, we have this ability now to designate a stretch of a river based on certain values, outstanding river values of as wild and scenic or recreational, other designations. But this bill gives us that infrastructure. And so we and others, but American Rivers has been the leader of this effort, getting rivers designated as wild and scenic so that they're protected in perpetuity. And we've got a number of bills in Congress right now on the Gila, on the Oahe in Oregon, the Oregon, Democracy Act that Senator Wyden is working hard and we're working with them on. We've got 5,000 miles of rivers with bills in Congress to get them protected as wild and scenic. And we think we have a shot at it between now and the end of this calendar year, the end of this Congress, to get those protected. So the Wild and Scenic Act is a great tool. It's not the only tool for protecting our rivers, but it is an important tool. Let me also just go on a quick tangent. American Rivers just completed and will be releasing, so this is a bit under the hood, if you will, releasing our National Protected Rivers Assessment later this year or early next. This is the first time anybody has aggregated all of the different ways you can protect a river and then created an index and will, with maps and otherwise, show here's where all the rivers are protected to a little or to a large extent, and what do we need to do to protect more rivers. So in any case, we're building momentum to understand what is protected and what needs to be protected in the coming years.
Well, you've touched a lot on all of these questions in this conversation so far in this episode about the politics of fixing rivers, of protecting rivers. This is a complicated subject these days. And I want to talk for just a moment about the politics. But before everyone starts reaching for their computer mouse to click out of the episode and say, no, I don't want to talk politics, bear with me, because I think this is pretty fascinating. You guys have enjoyed a lot of success over the last 50 years, and you've got some huge plans for the years ahead, and you're doing it in a landscape that you can describe it all kinds of ways right now in DC, but polarized for sure.
Yep.
It has probably never been more difficult than it is today to work across party lines in a lot of ways, to work with the leadership from both parties and actually be effective. How have you guys found success, especially in the modern political climate? Because American Rivers, I mean, to get anything done, you guys do have to be somewhat apolitical in a lot of your positions, and you have to play nice with everyone in the sandbox. You can't skew one way or the other. And I think a lot of times when people think of environmental crusades or conservation groups, people say, oh, well, they skew far to the left, and they always have, and that's just the way it is. You guys have been effective and have grown over the years because of your ability to really work across party lines. I'd like to ask you about that for a moment and interesting times in DC right now.
Exactly. And 100% agree. It's tough. It is an approach that American Rivers is committed to, working with everybody who loves our rivers. An example, a really good friend of mine, Congressman Mike Simpson, Republican from Idaho, he led the charge to put out a plan on removing the Snake River dams, and then not far from him, Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, is encouraging his wild and scenic bills. So just by way of example, those are two members of Congress that very different political parties and ideologies, but both caring about rivers. So it is a challenge and increasingly tough because the two parties are, beating up on each other. And, that's just an entertaining sport in Washington, D.C. these days. However, at the end of the day, while members of Congress and state legislators do need to play politics and go after the other party, the vast majority of them are in it for good reasons. The vast majority of our political leaders are trying to do something good. And when we come to them with a practical, if you will, common sense or an approach that has a lot of support from multiple parties, multiple constituents, they'll sit up and take notice. And I'll also say, obviously, we see a pendulum swing, if the White House changes one term or another term, suddenly some policy that was enacted last term gets changed back the other way. If you get through Congress a bill that has bipartisan support, it doesn't switch or doesn't get voted out the next Congress if the parties change. So part of the reason one of many reasons, but we do a bipartisan approach is it's enduring. When we get a bipartisan agreement and Congress enacts it or a state legislature enacts it, it's pretty much there forever going forward. So that's why we do it. It is tougher than it used to be, but we're just going to keep plugging at it and stay fact-based, stay rational. We're not out there attacking anybody for their personality or whatever. It's all about focused on the substance in the river and what people care about. And again, drinking water pulls better than anything else. People care about their drinking water.
They should.
Yeah, as well they should. So we keep bringing it back to the basics of what we care about.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be an incredible tightrope act right now in D.C. But I think to your point, there is still a lot of functionality. Things are still getting done on a lot of levels. And from my perspective, a big part of the success of American Rivers, and you touched on this a moment ago, is when you serve it up and make it easy for that congressman or that senator to kind of wrap their head around it and embrace it for the right reasons and then move it forward, you're going to find success. And you guys have always been very, very good at that.
And another example I'll just share, when the $2.4 billion in infrastructure bill that the Hydropower Association and American Rivers put together, we went to Rob Portman, Senator, Republican from Ohio, and Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia. And the two of them are going, wait, the two of you are supportive of this? Okay, fine. We'll put it in. And literally they took it and put it in. So building this diverse coalition that cares about rivers and taking it to both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, we can move it forward. So that's just one more example of the benefit, the impact of building this broader river movement, of which anglers are hugely important dimension of it. So, the angling community, there's so many anglers that are deeply connected to the river, that know it, that care, that deeply understand the river, and having their voice, their love of that river be part of the message is powerful, is an important component of what we need to be sharing with Congress.
Well, interesting times for sure, but it's good to know that there's progress being made in D.C. And as you mentioned, it doesn't matter what administration is sitting in the White House a few months from now. You've still got work to do, and you've still got to move that ball forward. And it's also nice when you have that track record where when you call a senator, a congressman, someone in the administration, because of the way you guys have been able to navigate the politics over these past several decades, they take your call. And I would imagine that with certain groups and certain organizations, that's not always the case. But having them being receptive to take a meeting, to hearing proposals, to listening is step one. And again, not an easy thing in D.C. these days.
Yeah, and I will add, and you alluded to this earlier, but I want to share with the listeners that there's so many ways people can get involved. I would encourage them, yes, become American Rivers member or member of your local friends group over river. Get involved somehow. Get on some email lists. Just read or go to AmericanRivers.org or any of the other river groups and learn a bit more. And then you can, do phone calls to your member of Congress or walk the halls or American Rivers has many groups. We've got a national board, regional boards. We've got local groups that lead river cleanups. I don't know the number for last year. The year before, we had 70,000 volunteers pulling trash out of the rivers throughout the country. And they pulled, millions of pounds of trash out. So if that's what you enjoy doing, Godspeed. That's great too. So point is, find a way to get involved that works for you and your life. And obviously, some folks have the philanthropic capacity to make a big gift. That's beautiful, and we love that, obviously, too. But the point is, figure out how you can get involved. Maybe you've got a family and you don't have much time, or maybe you're retired and you've got a bunch of time, or you've got a bunch of financial resources. But wherever you are, figure out what works for you and get involved. And it's a beautiful sense of community, of doing something for rivers that we all love so dearly. There is a sense of, wow, that felt good. I used to, this is another tangent, but I'll just share, used to work on national park issues. And the head of the Park Service once commented to me, I've never gotten a phone call from a bear. And he jokingly would say that people need to carry the voice, if you will, of the bears from Yellowstone or whatever. And that's a lot of times what anglers can do, is be the voice for the river or the fish. And so figure out your way that fits with your life to get involved and take that next step.
I love that. And again, that's largely what happened with the Pebble Mine issue up in Bristol Bay. I mean, the voice of the fish, and it worked. It's pretty exciting. And you're spot on in that a lot of people are busy. At the very least, if you can't do anything else, even if you don't have time to go online and submit comments or write a letter, hey, you can always scratch a check, because there are people that are all in and doing this, and they need the financial support to keep moving it forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about something that you guys do every year. It's been a great tool for American Rivers, America's list of most endangered rivers. This is something you put out every year, and it's amazing because it's now really caught on with all, mainstream media. When it gets published, I mean, it's in the New York Times, it's on CNN, it's on Fox. Everybody's talking about the annual list of most endangered rivers. Talk to us a little bit about the genesis of this project and why it's effective.
We've been doing it, I think it's 39 years now, so just shy of 40 years. And it is a phenomenal tool. And as you said, we're front page of USA Today with a map of the most endangered rivers. And one of the important dimensions, yes, these are rivers that are endangered, but we also have the criteria. There's a potential solution or action to be taken this year to improve the river.
So it's not just a list of, okay, here's the 10 rivers we're now writing off this year. They're beyond hope.
Exactly.
It's like these are the most threatened rivers. It's always a list of 10, correct?
Yes.
And with each one that's made the list, there is a potential solution or a remedy for hopefully getting the river off of that list.
Exactly. And I'll share another quick story, but we use this list not as a way to play gotcha or to try to hammer somebody, but as a catalyst to take action. So one example, we listed this year the Farmington River, and there's a dam on the Farmington owned by the company Stanley Black & Decker. And they, I believe, kind of inherited the dam at one point. It's a small hydropower dam. And we reached out to them before we published the list.
And this is the Farmington in
Connecticut.
Connecticut, right.
And said, hey, we are going to be listing this, but one, we want to give you a heads up, and two, we want to work with you on a solution here. And they, weren't perfectly thrilled at the beginning, but then said, well, actually, yeah, let's talk. And so, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has been saying, yeah, we'd love to get that dam down, and we have some funding potentially for it. And so we've been in dialogue with them. And I just use them as an example of a great actor going, wow, okay, we accept the fact that, one, it's causing problems. Two, there is an opportunity with the funding, and you're listing it, and you're bringing attention to it, and there's a potential solution. So the point is, we use the most endangered rivers list as a catalyst for good action. And we've seen that time, yes, whether it's Pebble, where we listed that several times, Bristol Bay on the list, but it often catalyzes some good action. And that's why it's been successful and been around this long, because it makes a difference.
And people are paying attention. I mean, it's caught on, and again, mainstream media, where they look at that list every year, and a lot of eyes are on that. So what a great tool to, as you say, bring attention, not just to threatened rivers, but, ways to solve these problems.
Yeah. And one other example, if I may, the Klamath River, which we've talked about, has been listed several times. And this last year, we listed the Klamath as our River of the Year, i.e. the positive story, and we gave River Champion Awards to a couple of tribal groups, one in particular, the Klamath Justice Coalition, a pretty hard-charging advocate group for removing those dams, and they were the group that had protested at Warren Buffett's annual meeting because Berkshire Hathaway, Berkshire Energy owns Pacificor that owns those dams on the Klamath. And we gave an award to the Klamath Justice Coalition and to Warren Buffett's company, Pacificor, because at the end of the day, they kicked in, I want to say $200 million to this deal and ended up making, at the end of the decision-making, they made some really positive offers to get this deal closed. And I was thrilled. Frankly, it was a teary-eyed moment to give an award to the Klamath Justice Coalition and Berkshire Energy. You know, those are two very different entities, but they all came together to reach a deal to restore the Klamath. And I'm thrilled to be able to recognize both of them. And they'd been doing battle for a couple years, but ended up coming together and reaching an agreement. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens. So in any case, that's a great example of coming together and moving things forward and what it takes to do it.
Well, and giving a lot of these corporations, when you talk about Berkshire, you talk about Black & Decker, whatever it is, you know, a chance for a PR win. I mean, that's a big thing these days. And when they can do the right thing, and again, it's kind of put in front of them and you make it, I don't want to say you make it easy, but you show them the path forward and show them the benefits of doing the right thing on behalf of the river. It's good to see when they pay attention and actually commit.
Yeah, and give them the credit for it. We absolutely do that because guess what? We want more companies to be doing that. And so we want the previous ones to go, you know, that was a good thing. That
worked out pretty well.
Yeah, we're happy about that. And so that the next more and more companies will join in this effort to restore our rivers. We are, just by way of side example, but reaching out to whether it's a lot of the drinking, you know, whether it's a Coca-Cola or whatever, or a brewery, microbreweries throughout the country that need clean drinking water. Well, they rely on our rivers. So we want them to be part of this overall movement as well, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. We've covered a lot of ground here. What else have we forgotten to mention that you would like to share with our listeners? Any other key elements of what American Rivers has planned for the years ahead, or what you're in the trenches on right now that I have forgotten to ask you about, Tom? Any parting thoughts on that?
You know, my only parting thought, it goes back, Jim, to something you said earlier, when sometimes anglers are out there going, hey, I want to forget a lot of the challenges and stresses. I just want to be on the river fishing. And I want to say, I'm with you on that. I'm out there and not thinking about anything else. I'm just zoning into the river and my fly and watching that. And now, while we need those moments of connection to the river, and so I am applauding and loving those moments, and remember that after that trip, when you get back to your house and you're dialing back into emails and work, that's the time to say, man, I love that river. I love those fish. I love that experience. And now is the time I should take a little action, or write a check, or join a group. Don't think about it while you're on the river. Love the river and get that moment, that time where you can relax and your blood pressure drops, et cetera, et cetera. When you're back home, figure out a way to get involved. That's what, as you've said, complete angling is all about.
Well, I love that. That should be the biggest takeaway for everybody listening right here, because it gets back to what we were saying, uniting those voices, uniting those stakeholders, making some noise and getting politicians and policymakers to pay attention, because that is the path forward. There's no question.
Thank you.
Well, this has been great. Where's your next fishing trip, Tom? What rivers are you going to be visiting and wading into in the weeks and months ahead?
I will be heading down to One Fly down in Jackson, Wyoming in a couple weeks. So doing that. Also, my wife and I are heading up to Pennsylvania, I think the weekend before that, up to Allenbury, doing some fishing up there for trout. And I think I'm actually going to scoot out, do some smallmouth bass fishing. So I've got a couple weekends coming up.
Nice. Well, that's what it's all about. It's the best thing.
It's one of the upsides of this job. I'm advocating on rivers, and I'm going to get out there and enjoy them as well.
Well, as you should, as we all should. So that's great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today on the episode and for sharing your background and talking about the great work that American Rivers is doing. I would encourage people to go to the website, check it out. Tell us about some of the resources they can explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Encouraging people to go to AmericanRivers.org and learn more about the rivers that you love. And, well, thank you, Jim. I'll just say huge shout out to you, Yellow Dog, getting folks out there, safely and enjoying and connecting with the rivers. I love these partnerships. So thank you. It's a great partnership, and together we're doing good work, and we're going to do even more and greater work in the years ahead.
Well, thanks for joining us.
All righty. Thank you very much.
Well, that is it for this latest episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, destination, angling, and the search for adventure. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research travel, source gear, equipment, and flies for your next destination, and stay up to date on the latest angling news and developments. Join us for our next episode, and always remember that life is short, and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by Brian Gregson with music provided by the Steep Canyon Rangers. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more destination profiles, travel news, and expert advice, and be sure to join us for our next episode.